Hi, this is Julian for Production Expert. UJAM have released an update to their virtual drummers, and there's a lot of new stuff to play with. Let's have a look at that today. I've got this on Solid because Solid's my favourite, but also it's the one that I used on a little demo track that I made using the original version of Solid. And when I opened it with this new version, I was very pleased to see that everything's retrospectively compatible. Basically, the same content and sounds are there. So I opened it and everything was as it was before, but with new stuff to play with. A track sounds like this. And everything's as it was. However, there is more. You probably see some stuff at the bottom of the UI, which we'll have a look at in a minute, but there are some other things to look at first. First off, there's more content to play with in terms of there's 30 new styles, 690 new grooves, and 150 new presets per drummer. So loads of new stuff to play with. And these styles, the MIDI effectively is more useful than it was before, just because you can now drag and drop it out onto the timeline. So for example, here, if I just move this out of the way, we've got these little sets of dots along here. Obviously, this all changes depending on which preset or style you're running. But for example, here, if I want to grab this fill and break it out into its constituent parts, here it is, and it's as MIDI on the timeline, ready for editing. So you've got a lot more control than you used to. However, there's some new stuff happening at the bottom of the UI. First thing I'll look at is this master section. Over here, we've got reverb, saturation, and maximization available. The saturation in particular, I think, is really nice. I'm going to solo this up and we'll listen to the drums in isolation. And just listening here to this saturation. Nice. The reverb as well. This is master control for the individual reverb sends, which we have available down here in this mixer. It's not a fully featured mixer, but what I really like is they're maintaining the simplicity that I liked about the original Solid, but addressing some of the things that were arguably maybe less flexible than the majority of people would like. So, for example, in here, we can go through and we have individual reverb send levels for each of the voices. And we've also got a new ambience section, which has overheads and room available. And all of these can be balanced up using these little faders. So for example, here on the overheads, I'll solo this up and we'll have a listen to the overheads on their own. And I can compress these individually or filter them. The same goes for the room. On the subject of compression, there is an awful lot of compression available in here. We've, of course, got the processing that comes in this section here with this amount slider, but we've got this maximizer over here and these individual compressor settings in the mixer. So if you like squishy drums, you can certainly get them out of this. However, what you probably noticed when I was flicking through here is we've got these type buttons. I like this a lot. What this is giving us alternative sounds. So as well as changing sounds according to the kit you have selected, within the kits, we've also got alternatives, different numbers depending on the voice we've got selected. But for example, in toms, we've got 4 sorts. I'm going to jump back to the beginning of this, and this is got some stuff going on around toms. Very different sounds. If we go to natural. So for example there, I quite like that, but it's a bit ringy. But I can pull the decay back, deaden it down a little bit, get positively 70s. And if I wanted to, I could wind the reverb right up, take the reverb up on the master, and maybe even swap it out for something else. If I go to power over here and go with the mix preset, I'm expecting I'll get some gated stuff and I can get some extremely different sound. Not one that I want to go with though, so we'll pop back here. But as I say, we've got individual control of decay and tuning and reverb settings, and I think we're still on the power setting, so we'll come back to something a little bit more appropriate. I did like smooth on here with deep. Another thing that you couldn't do without doing a bit of a workaround on the original versions of these UJAM virtual drummers was individual outputs. You could do it, but you had to run multiple instruments. In here, there's straight up individual tracks. So if I come in here, I've created some auxiliaries for these to go to pull out the kick and the snare. And if I just change the output from master to individual for both of these, we'll find that they'll come out on here. What we've got is we've got outputs according to what's happening here. And you don't have control over which they go to, and you can't combine voices onto a single channel or anything. You'd have to do that in your DAW mixer. But you can get individual outputs for separate processing. So, for example, I've got some plugins on here, and it sounds different compared to internally. And, of course, you can change that in whatever way you want. What do I think of these updates? I really like them. What I like is the amount of options that have been added without adding significantly to how complicated and how many choices you're presented with. I particularly like the choices of sounds within a style. Particularly solid is that it offers really natural sounds, and that's very much to my taste. But if you prefer something a bit more processed, you'll find it in solid, and more processed still, check out something like heavy or PHAT.